Leadership is taking people on a journey where there's a vision, guidance and purpose.
Good leaders lead with the heart as well as the head.
Leadership means doing the right thing for the right reason, no matter how difficult it might be.
You're listening to Leadership Unwrapped, a podcast where you will hear from people who are living leadership every day. Hi, I'm Patricia.
And I'm Niamh.
And you know, Niamh, it can be amazing that you can work with someone for many years and work closely even with them and not really have a sense of the wide breadth of experience that they bring before they've started working with you, which is exactly what's happened in the conversation we've just had with Giles Warrington here in the University of Limerick.
Yeah, like, you definitely know Giles so much better than I do, and you've always spoken so highly of him. And after speaking to him and just hearing the wealth of knowledge that he brings in so many aspects of life, I can really see why I absolutely love that conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I learned even a bit about sleep that I know I've heard him talk about it before, but just having that one-to-one with him about sleep has actually made me chill out a small bit more about being a mum of teens and the way they sleep. It was actually really worth listening to.
Yeah, and for me, I know listeners, we're chopping and changing, but there was so much covered in this conversation. But for me, what really resonated was when he was talking about kind of the early stages of your career journey. And obviously for me, when I'm doing my PhD now and hoping to kind of start a career in academia, it was really poignant for me to hear that from someone in such a high position as well. So yeah.
And he comes from coaching from a different perspective, but brings it into his leadership and has some good insights even around leadership and negotiation. I just think this is really worth listening to, listeners. I think you'll get something for your own journey as a leader. So let's hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure you're going to love it.
Hi everyone. We're absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Giles Warrington to our podcast today. So Giles is a colleague and a good friend who is widely experienced in the field of leadership and in coaching. So really looking forward to having this conversation with you, Giles. You're very welcome.
Great to be with you, Trish.
That's great. So just by way of background for everyone, Giles currently works as the head of Department of Physical Education and Sports Sciences at the University of Limerick, but he hasn't spent all of his life in academia. He comes from an industrial background and high-performance sports background before he joined the University of Limerick. Giles has worked with over 100 Olympic, Paralympic, World and European medalists and their coaches. Giles has attended and worked with athletes and coaches at 6 Olympic Games, dating back as far as Atlanta 1996, and was part of the Irish medical team at 4 Olympic Games, well-travelled and well-experienced, which hopefully we'll hear a bit about. He was the head of services at the National Coaching Training Centre. Which services again?
Sport science and athlete support services, effectively.
Brilliant. In what we have come to know as the NCTC. Originally from Felixstowe in the east of England in Suffolk, he is now living in Ireland, and we will call him a proud Irish soul. So we're really delighted to welcome you to our podcast today.
Thanks. It's really a great pleasure to be here.
So we might start maybe, I know I've given a short introduction to your background, but for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Yeah, I suppose it's a kind of a strange career pathway, lots of zigzags and ups and downs. I actually, when I was leaving school, went into banking, which I absolutely hated and did for 3 years. My father was involved in international finance and tried to kind of push me that direction.
Definitely a stark contrast anyway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I didn't do great in my A-levels, the equivalent of leaving cert at all, because I wasn't really focused on university. And I got on to what they called an accelerated management training program, which is for university graduates. So I got a kickstart of 3 years. Oh. And I just loathed it, the whole thing. So I stayed for 3 years, and then I was thinking to myself, well, if I'm going to leave, I need to think about a pathway where I'm going to go. What am I passionate about? And I think, that's the advice I always give to people, to focus on your passions. And sport was the thing that kept coming back. And so I just researched sport and what you could do. And then I came across this term sports science. I thought, what the hell is that? And interestingly, I did no sciences at school. Oh. So I had no scientific background whatsoever. I'm now an exercise physiologist, professor of exercise physiology. So I kind of researched it and looked at different programs and courses and what it was about and spoke to a few people. And eventually I took the leap and went in as a mature student and went to St Mary's College, Strawberry Hill, which is a strong Irish
That's right.
link.
Absolutely.
And I absolutely loved it. I just fell in love with sports science and everything science because I was learning it in a medium that interested me, athletic performance. And so I did that. And when I graduated, I thought, well, what am I going to do? I'm not sure. And one of my next door neighbours, who was a fellow student, said, did you see there was an advert for a job as a physiologist in the British Olympic Medical Centre? And the deadline is tomorrow. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll put an application in. So I applied for it, and much to my surprise, I got the job. And some of the feedback I got was my extracurricular activities. I had a range of coaching qualifications, so it wasn't just having a sports science degree. Right. I had a much wider background, and that was a big selling point. And that's really always struck with me. So I worked at the British Olympic Medical Centre for 3 years and really loved it. I was going to leave after 2 and go and do a master's in Loughborough, but my head, my mentor, my guide, who I'll talk about, Professor Craig Sharp, who incidentally became the first professor of sports science in UL, which is pure coincidence.
Yeah.
He said, would you like to stay on and do a PhD? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And it was with the British rowing team, which at that time were the leading rowing nation in the world. So I started that. But then in the meantime, an opportunity came up in Ireland to move to Ireland. And I kind of thought, that looks interesting. Let's kind of delve into it. So this position at the National Coaching Training Centre came up, and I decided to apply for it. And to my surprise, I got it. And I thought probably I was going to come for a couple of years, and 30 years plus later, I'm still here.
All right.
So and then really, so working there, and then I had the opportunity to move into academia initially at Dublin City University for 10 years, commuting from the Limerick area to Dublin.
Oh, wow.
And then came back home, as they say, in 2015.
Right. And you've worked with a lot of elite athletes here, certainly in your career. Can you tell us what it's like to work in that space?
Yeah, they're a very different breed. I think, you have to be very focused in terms of what you do and the sacrifices you have to take to get to the very top in sport. And I'd say not only just working with the athletes, but very much working with the coaches alongside them. And, the role of the coach can never be understated. They have such an important role. The athletes get all the plaudits, and quite rightly, because of the sacrifices they make. But really, the coach has such an integral role to play. So, for me, it was just a labour of love working in that space and that domain, just seeing these amazing individuals and the sacrifices they make, and dealing with adversity, disappointments, and what I call the bounce back ability factor, being able to overcome a disappointment, a major, disappointment in their performance, and then reflecting, taking stock, replanning, regrouping, and then moving on and getting better. Yeah. And I think that's a lesson for life, to be honest with you.
Totally. I mean, it must be hugely devastating to train so hard, to give so many hours to something. And it's thousands of hours. It's not just a couple of hours. And then not to win and to come to terms with that, to pick yourself back up in often a quite short space of time for the next competition. So the coach is probably pivotal in that, I take it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. But it is a learning process. And I think things like self-reflection, because, there's a famous coach who said, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. Yeah. So you really need to, at the end of each season, I would say, whether you've had a fantastic season or a poor season, you need to reflect, take stock. And as a very, very good friend of mine, who I often quote, Liam Moggan, who was given an honorary doctorate by UL last year, he talks about the WWW, what went well, and PIGS, personal improvement goals. So what went well over the season? So write them down. And then where are the areas I need to improve? And we should always be striving for improvement. Yeah. Now, the margins are very small. But if you sit back and do what you did the previous year, you're going to be lost. Yeah. So you've constantly got to strive that. The Japanese use this term kaizen. And if you think of Japan as being the most technologically advanced nation in the world, and it means continuous improvement. So you may be the best now, but unless you strive to improve all the time, you'll be left behind.
Okay.
There is just so much, I know you alluded to it there, but there's so much that you can learn from sport on a personal level. Like those traits that you're describing, the resilience, the dedication, that reflective piece, like it's huge for your everyday life as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a famous manager in sport called David Brailsford, who worked with the Sky cycling team and has worked with some very high level groups in sport. And he came over this idea of marginal gains. So he talked about it as a bicycle, that you can trim certain things to improve the aerodynamics, the effectiveness, and the accumulation of those marginal gains will lead to greater performance. And like what I often say to athletes is it's far easier to improve 5 things by 0.5% than 1 thing by 2.5%, because the margins are so small. So be striving to look for those small marginal improvements to your overall performance. And I think that applies to all groups and areas.
And they accumulate, I think. You know, that's
absolutely.
the piece. But you mightn't see it all the time, but it is accumulating.
But striving for that continuous improvement, I think, is the challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more, Giles, about your PhD. So you said it was with the British rowing team.
Yeah. So as I say, my career, when we talk about my career, a lot of it was by luck and accident. So it's probably not the advice.
Mine too. No, mine too.
It's probably not the advice I'd be giving to somebody now. But I just think I've been very lucky in my career. So I had the opportunity, as I say, I was going to go to Loughborough to do my master's and to do this PhD. So it was a kind of a part-time PhD, but it was very much around my work. So it was almost like a professional doctorate, if you like. Right. So it was around the team and their preparation. It was very much around altitude training. So one of the things athletes do is that they go to altitude where the air is thinner. It's all to do with what they call hypoxia. And the idea behind it is if you go to a higher altitude where the air is thinner, your body adjusts and adapts. So in other words, you produce more red blood cells to allow you to carry more oxygen. I know I'm getting into the science
No, it's
now.
interesting.
But, as an endurance athlete, it's about oxygen utilization of oxygen and oxygen availability. So the principle behind it is if you go to an altitude where the air is thinner, this hypoxic environment, you produce more red blood cells. So when you come back down to sea level, you've got more of them. The air is at its normal concentration, and your performance will be better. Okay. So I went to the Austrian Alps, a place called Silveretta, which is in the middle of nowhere, and we were based in this hydroelectric dam, and we were staying in these huts, which were literally at the base of the dam, and we'd be up there for 4 weeks at a time, middle of nowhere in the Alps, and effectively training, sleeping, eating, and it was a kind of an incredible experience, but working with really world-class athletes as well.
Hugely different from being in the bank. Just need to say that.
just a bit.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I know now, like even from the introduction there, we know that you've worked with, over 100 athletes at that level now. But at that time, that must have been so surreal for someone with such an interest in sport to be able to work with athletes of such a high standard and also experience.
Oh yeah, and even working with people who were your idols 2 or 3 years before, and that was quite daunting. And how you deal with that, and you're giving advice to them, and huge responsibility. I can remember when I started in the Olympic Centre, I'd literally been there a week, and there was a big training camp going on, so all the staff were going to the training camp, and I was left to man the fort. And there was a kind of a key group coming in, and I was still learning the ropes, and it was, you learnt on the job. But fortunately, I had phenomenal mentors. I mentioned Professor Craig Sharp, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he was the pioneer, the godfather of sports science in the UK. And interestingly, he trained as a vet originally, and he was involved in sport as an athlete himself. And a very famous leading coach called John Anderson was asking him questions about physiology and training, and Craig couldn't fully answer them all. So he decided to do a volte-face and change his career and become a sports scientist rather than a vet. Now, he worked with elite animals, so he had a lot of the understanding. He became the first lecturer in sports science in Birmingham University in 1970. Right. So just an amazing individual, but his background is so vast. But he's one of these people who had he was incredibly intelligent. His wealth of knowledge in the area was incredible, but you could ask him the most basic question and he would bring it down to that level, and he would explain it to you, and he'd probably get a piece of paper and write a diagram. And there was no airs and graces. He wouldn't look down his nose and say, well, why don't you know that? And, so the number of people in my area and profession who've been influenced by him because of his approach, that nothing was too minimal, or he'd always give you the time, even though he would be incredibly busy. And for me, that's a true mentor. Yeah. And, so I was very, very, very lucky to have an outstanding mentor.
Yeah. I think that's the joy of our careers, is that if we're lucky, we have exposure to these amazing minds. who are natural pedagogists, natural teachers, and who mentor just through their being, how they are in the conversation and relationship with you. It's not always like that in academia, but certainly there are moments, and when you come across them, you treasure them. I would feel the same in relation to that.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you what drew you to coaching? You love coaching and you're passionate about it. You talk about it a lot in our conversations. So what was that initial draw?
Yeah, I suppose, again, it was when I was doing my sports science degree, there was the opportunity to do extracurricular coaching courses. You did them voluntarily. Yeah. And I found, I played sport at a reasonable level, but I was never going to be an elite athlete. So for me, I got my drive from being involved in a coaching environment and a support environment. And that's where I thrive. So I get huge pleasure out of seeing individuals, not just athletes, individuals performing to their potential. That for me is a major achievement. And, people often say, well, what is coaching? Coaching is effectively facilitating somebody to maximize their performance, whatever that performance is. Yeah. And again, I mentioned Liam Moggan. And Liam is a great coach developer and coach educator. And when he's working with coaches, for example, they could be Gaelic coaches or hurling coaches, he says, I don't work with hurling coaches. I work with people who happen to coach hurling.
Right. Okay.
So it's very much about the people first and foremost. So you are working with them. You are facilitating them to achieve their potential.
Yeah. Okay. And you work in a leadership role now that's busy. I mean, we both have similar jobs in that we lead very large and busy and productive and highly ranked schools. So, I mean, there is an elite academic piece to the work that we do with our colleagues. So what insights do you think you translate from that career and that background into your leadership now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in the roles we do, they're very demanding, but you have to have good people skills. You have to be able to work with people. You have to appreciate their needs. You have to deal with difficulties, conflicts. But I think you have to have a clear vision and a clear goal in terms of what you want to achieve. It's probably a slightly thankless role in some ways, but I'm kind of a bit strange. When I came to UL, I knew in my mind's eye I wanted to lead the department because there was things I wanted to achieve within that. So I think it's having a clear plan and vision is going to be an important part of that process. But it's how you engage and communicate with people. So there's people who have influenced me. I remember hearing an interview with an academic who's a professional mediator called Stuart Diamond, based in the States. And he wrote a book called Getting More. And I suppose he's the guy that they bring in when everything is lost. So I remember, if you remember, probably about 15 years ago, all the scriptwriters in Hollywood went on strike.
Oh, yes.
So he was the guy that came in. Now, some of the things he talks about, he says, you can't begin a negotiation until you see the picture in the other person's head. So in other words, we come in with a view, this is what I want. But unless you can have an appreciation of what the other person is looking at, how can you begin that negotiation? And the other things he talked about is the power of questions. So rather than make a statement, you ask a question. Because if you ask the question, you see the picture in the other person's head.
Yeah.
So those kind of things stick with me. And there are a lot of the skills around coaching. And, they're soft skills. So again, I mentioned Liam Moggan. So when I first met Liam and I worked at the National Coaching and Training Centre. I was this hard sports scientist, a physiologist. It was all about numbers. And then there was this fluffy, woolly fella coming in talking about, feelings. And I thought, well, this guy's from Mars. But we've almost morphed into each other. And as his wife would say, we have a bromance now. Yeah. But I learned a lot from him. So he would have been a big influence as well. And it's really shaped my thinking, how I work with people, how I engage with people, how I understand situations. Yeah,
I think the nature of leadership has changed so much, and I mean, we talk about this in the work that I do, but the authoritative leader really is in the past, and the hero leader, the one out in front being the champion. It's changed so much. There's more negotiation needed, more. You can't always have democracy, but certainly more democratic ways of working, and that's exhausting actually. Do you find that in your work? Do you find it's like that?
It can be. See, I'm very much a humanist in nature. That's where I come from, and I tend to frustrate, colleagues, probably most definitely PhD students, because I tend to answer a question with 5 questions.
Yeah.
So in other words, what do you think yourself? So in other words, it's about empowerment and doing that. But yes, it can be exhausting. But I would certainly be, I don't like hierarchies. I like relatively flat structures. I know at the end of the day, somebody has to make the ultimate decision, and that's you. Yeah. And you can be overly democratic at times. And in other words, you get nowhere. So, but you do need to try and bring people along with you. And I suppose that's what I strive to do. And they're taking a sport analogy, they always talk about the great snooker players. They're always playing 5 shots ahead. So in other words, they're not just looking at the shot they're about to play. They're thinking, well, what's going to come next? And where am I going to be in 5 shots? So I always try and do that myself, that, we're here now, but where do I want to be in the longer term? Yeah. And a great friend of mine, the sports psychologist Niamh Fitzpatrick, who is the sister of Dara Fitzpatrick, the helicopter pilot who sadly died in a horrific incident. She always says to me, start with the end in mind. Yeah. So in other words, where do you want to get to first and foremost, and then come back to here?
I think that's hugely important, because the nature of our work can be what I call interrupt driven. It's, there's so much I'm having a hate relationship with emails at the moment because there's just so many of them. But so you can be in that interrupt place. It's very difficult to think strategically then. So it's about having that mindset about looking to the 5 shots ahead, but also making the space to think about the 5 shots ahead. That's also important in the dynamic.
Yeah, and I would have to say I haven't cracked it. And, I think now we're having a conversation. I'm going to go back to my office after this and I think, oh, God, there's all these emails to answer. Yeah. But I think you need to be a little bit selfish and say, I need to factor time for critical thinking. And unfortunately, the jobs that we do as leaders, it's very demanding. You have to please people as well. But sometimes you need to say, well, you can't please everybody all the time. You need to factor time. So have that critical space, having downtime. So, red time when it's not emails or meetings. I need, to do my job effectively, I need critical thinking space. And it's easier said than done, but it's something that, I'm very aware of and something that I need to improve and seeking that continuous improvement.
Yeah. So, but also, also the space to think about that interpersonal piece as well. Like, I know we have a lot of listeners that would be based within schools and based within education. And it's something that I've heard, and now obviously I'm in a leadership position myself the same way that the two of you are, but from even speaking to school leaders will say, because it's easy to get caught up in that administrative piece and the pressures and the accountability and all those sorts of things, like the emails that you're talking about, it's easy to get caught up in that and forget about the person-centred aspect. I just putting into the school context, I know I've spoken to leaders who've said, that they might go through a day, no one would actually know if they were there in the school or not because they're so locked up in their office and not out there dealing with the students or not out there dealing with the staff and the teachers and waving hello as they're coming in the gate and things like that. And I think that's the human-centred part of leadership that can get swallowed up a little bit if the job becomes, that too busy because of the administration and the accountability.
You could spend your life firefighting.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to, you could spend the day on emails. So you need to block that off. And I suppose some of the things I learnt, you need to, your key administrator, get them to manage your diary. And I thought, God, that's really strange. I wouldn't like that at all. But I wouldn't go back on it now. Yeah. So having somebody to manage your diary who understands the way you work. So if there's presses for meetings, they'll say, well, no, actually, you need that space to work on these areas. So, factor in time at critical stages. So I suppose it's really looking at the totality of the job and saying, I can use a traffic light system. So there's the need to do, the nice to do, the not to do. And so you really need to be focusing on the needs first of all, and there might be some nice bits you want to do as well. And then the not to do's, that's delegation. And again, I suppose a great bit of advice I was given taking over as head of department, never say the leave it with me statement. Always try and get the person you're with to come up with a solution. Yeah. So it comes back to my humanism approach is, well, what do you think yourself? How do you think we can resolve this? That kind of thing. Rather than say, leave it with me. Because if you're leaving it with you, that's another thing to add to your to-do list. So I think it's doing it. The power of delegation, and I don't think I'll ever master it, but you have to have trust in other people. And in many cases, they'll do it a lot better than I will. So it's having trust in people to do that. And I think linked to that is surrounding yourself with positive people.
Yes.
It's so important.
Yeah. I get so uplifted because as I say, obviously I haven't been head of department, like they'll say, I'm at the start of an academic career.
Yes.
It'll come.
But I do get so uplifted because, sometimes because of the fact that I'm at the start of a career in academia or wherever it is, I suppose, that I do head. Sometimes I think, am I a bit idealistic, but then I talk to people, I get to speak with people like you who have so much experience and are in such a high position, but you have that humanist piece that seems to be at the centre of your work, and I think that's so promising. Yeah. And it ties in kind of what you were saying there, Patricia, that people are thinking more in that lines of thinking when they're talking about leadership. Like I think it was the Brené Brown podcast I was listening to, but they were saying that work used to be led by the hands. Now at the moment it's led by your head, but going forward it's going to be led by the heart, and that's the way that it's moving.
Yeah, I love that.
And it seems to be something that kind of, what's interesting is it seemed to resonate with you very early on in your career from the way you spoke about it when you said that it was the coaching piece that was key to you getting that first position in the area. So could that have been kind of a pivotal moment? Was there a very resonation?
I mean, I think on that point, what I would say to people in an early career in any area is seize the opportunities available to you, because they're going to be the things that allow you to stand out to the rest.
Yeah.
So, you think, you come out of university, you're applying for jobs, you're in a competition, but if you've got extra items, unique skill sets on your CV, people are going to say, wow, this is good. So seize those opportunities. And I think there comes a time where it almost pivots and you're progressing in your career, and then you need to start saying, okay, I need to probably say no to that now, because I can't do that. But so it does shift and change. But I always say, students, you often see ones who are going to excel because they're always putting themselves forward to volunteer or participate because they want to learn, they want to engage. And I think that would be a strong piece of advice, is look at the opportunities. Now, obviously, they have to be related to what you want to achieve, but seize the moment, seize the opportunities that you could have.
Yeah. I feel the same. I feel like you. I feel very blessed to have the career that I've had. And if you'd asked me 20 years ago, would I've had this success or done what I've done, I wouldn't have imagined that. But when I look back on the one factor that has brought me to this point, I think it is taking the opportunities when they came at the right time, and sometimes wondering, God, have I taken on a bit too much? But later on, when I would have maybe gone for jobs or been recommended for something, it would have been that opportunity that I didn't know everything about, but said I'll give it a shot and do my best in it, and I learn from it. That brought me to the point. And sometimes even now in a leadership role, you open up the space for people. You think this is a great opportunity, and they say no, and that's fine. But I go away thinking it's a pity. There's an opportunity there that may support you in the future for a leadership role if that's something you're interested in. So it's about being clever about those type of opportunities, I think. And I agree with you completely. You reach a point then where you're saying no because you're looking at something like finishing a PhD, for example, and you say, so now I'm in the final stretch, I've got to put the blinkers on and complete this for the currency. So you're making these weighted judgments depending on the stage you're at.
I think as well, it's a really valid point, but as your career progresses, you're kind of moving away from that kind of achievement-driven approach. And it's very much about mentoring. Yeah. And it's about supporting. So it's rather than saying, I need to lead this, this, and this, you might be saying, well, this could be something really good for you. I'll support you. Yeah. I'll guide you. And it's being willing to do that and not try and control all the pieces.
Yeah, and I find myself saying when colleagues are looking, but when I'm seeing a potential and I'm saying, go for it, I'll be at the back. I'll lead from the back a bit and you lead from the front. So it's almost like a co-piloting because it's a mentoring. And in your head as a leader, it will really only take a month for that and the person will be, but they don't see it in themselves.
But they know that you're there to support and guide.
Yeah.
So maybe the ties are slightly severed. But if there's something they're not sure about, a good mentor will always be there to guide you.
Yeah. And I like that. I mean, I have colleagues who are in senior roles that sometimes you just have this conundrum that you can't crack, and you can go and say, look, this is it. And and open up the space for a bit of mentoring. And normally they won't give you the answer. They'll say, okay, how did you end up here? And what are the factors that brought this? And what do you think can change?
And definitely mentoring is a two-way street. I'm always striving for mentors, people who I can learn from and gain more from.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily have to be senior colleagues. They could just be somebody in a different domain who can add value. And I suppose I'd be very much a reflective practitioner. So I'm always looking for feedback to actually see, well, how can you improve?
Yeah. And I was at graduation last Monday, and I was with colleagues from the business area, and one of them was talking about the area that he lectures. I was like, oh my God, I really want to go in and do it. It was on ethics in fiscal ethics, and I was like, I really want to go and listen to that. And I just said, oh, I'd love that. And he said, just come in. I thought, this is amazing. So I'm going to be learning about that this semester. Good. But it's that piece about also opening up to say there's an area that I could learn more about that I'm up for. But the really beautiful thing for me was that the other person was so confident in their work that they were saying, come on away in and see what you think. Love that.
I think linked to that as well is sometimes just admitting you don't know stuff. So it's funny, I go to conferences and sometimes a presenter will be being grilled and they clearly don't know the answer. And they're trying to kind of work their way through it and tie themselves up in knots. Well, maybe the easiest thing is to say, look, I actually don't know the answer, but Professor Y is in the audience who is an expert in this. They may have a comment on it.
Yeah.
So I think it's admitting what you don't know as well.
Yeah. It's super liberating to be able to admit what you don't know.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, and I know I've talked to you before about Edith Eger's work and The Gift, and she talks about the prisons that we make in our minds, and this is one of them, that I have to be the expert. So if somebody asks me and I don't know, I feel diminished, whereas she's saying that's just a cage.
I hate the word expert because expert implies you know everything, but nobody knows everything. We're constantly learning. Yeah. So you're not an expert in anything, I don't think. So I kind of sometimes I might be called expert, and I'm very uncomfortable with it because if you the day when you stop learning is the day you're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the one thing I like about the way we're working now is that we're becoming much more open to coaching and we're beginning to see the value of mentoring and not to see it almost either in a hierarchical way but in a knowledge way or in a skills way. Yeah. And I know when I took over as head, our dean at the time was saying it's really good to speak to an experienced head who has had those curveballs land on their desk, and you were that person, Giles, and I think you provided mentoring in a way that didn't make me feel out of my depth in the role. It would call on what you already know. But then there are pieces that you have done, so you cut through it much quickly to say, look, this is how I've done it. This may be useful to you, but it may not work in your team. And that generosity in the system, I think, is growing. And that's really important.
And I think probably what I was doing is really just sharing knowledge that I gained from others as well. Yeah. And it's interesting when you talk about coaching. So you talk about coaching in business. In the early stages, it was very much performance orientated. So we'll bring a coach in to increase our turnover or whatever. But now it's becoming much more holistic, and this word well-being is coming in more and more. The companies are looking to say, well, if we can focus on the personal side, the well-being of our staff, that's going to improve their human performance, which will have an indirect effect on productivity. So it's not just about productivity per se, that's an indirect thing, and this whole area of corporate social responsibility is a huge area now. So I do some work with companies around that space, particularly at the executive level, and you're very much seeing now it's investing in the people. It's investing in a holistic approach to what they do. Yeah. Which is important. Yeah, because we're learning. I spend a lot of time looking at the dark side of culture, of workplace culture. People know that, but I also look at things like stress and burnout. And I know I'm like the woman from Killinascully saying, I'm not in the habit of repeating myself, but I'm going to repeat myself now for a minute and say that a lot of the burnout doesn't necessarily come from the amount of work. It comes from the lack of agency or voice about your work. That's the catalyst that puts people over. Yeah. And we really need to pay attention to that. And coaching allows us to have the space to do that, to begin to look at what's the pattern. And is it the amount of work I'm doing? And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's about gaining the voice and saying, it is too much. I need to reshape this. Or is it the way that I'm thinking about my work? Or, how much of it is imposed? How much am I a perfectionist adding to it, etc.? There's so many complexities in this. And I think the way that we're thinking about coaching now
allows us to have those conversations, which leads to the well-being.
Yeah,
that's the piece.
As I said, for me, coaching is about people. It's about facilitation.
Yeah.
So it's really, having a coach is not somebody to give you opinion. It's to help guide your thinking and your discussion.
Yeah.
And sometimes that involves uncomfortable silences.
Yeah.
And again, talking to Liam, who I keep referencing, he said to me once, don't speak unless your words outperform the silence. And it's so true.
That's huge.
How many times do people just keep talking? You see it with coaches on the sideline. It infuriates me, that they're expressing themselves and they're gesturing. Is it for the camera or for the benefit of the players? Because the players aren't listening. So even things like, one of my colleagues, Ian Sherwin, is involved in coaching research, and he looks at things like, what can you influence at half time? And the evidence would strongly say that the players, the athletes, are only going to pick up one or two things. So you should really just, give them a chance to recover a little bit, and then emphasize what are the two key things we're going to do in the second half, rather than 50 million things, and then they're not taken on board.
Yeah.
So, sometimes silence is a good thing.
Yeah.
Brevity, so more is less and less is more.
Yeah. Yeah. A clear message.
That's it.
Yeah, clear message, isn't it? That's huge.
And I suppose when you're talking about departments or teams, it's a clear message, but it's a shared message.
Yeah.
You want people to buy into the message and the culture. There's a great Kenyan proverb which says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together.
Wow.
So, it's about bringing, if you want, if you've got a long game, sometimes you need to react to a situation and it's reactive.
Yeah.
Okay, to get the outcome. But if you're looking at a long-term plan, you've got to bring the team with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really powerful. I think that's really powerful. I also think we're going to have to chase Liam Morgan down, see if he'll join us in the podcast.
I'd be delighted.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. Can I move slightly laterally, because I want to learn loads about this, because I need to. Let's talk about sleep. Okay, so you're a researcher with a lot of interest in sleep. So tell us a bit about what drew you to that research and the type of things you look at.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So it goes back to my sport role. So working with the Irish Olympic teams. Quite often Olympic Games are in far-off climes. So I remember going right back to 2000. So the Olympic Games were in Australia, in Sydney. So as the kind of lead sports scientist with the team, one of my key jobs was a question that was set to me was, how do we get our athletes from Dublin and Ireland to Sydney with minimum disruption, minimum fatigue, to allow them to get into their final preparation as quickly as possible to optimize their performance? So first thing I had to do was a lot of desktop research around jet lag, travel fatigue. And at that time, there probably wasn't a huge amount around sport. It was more commercial. Now, there was more because obviously everybody was going to the Olympics, so does work begin to evolve. And the more I kind of read into it and looked into it and developed strategies and things, I thought, God, there's a lot to this. And so that was what really captured my imagination. And then moving into sleep. Okay. So, the way I look at sleep is often if I'm doing sessions with groups, I'll actually say, okay, hands up who sleeps. Okay. And you hope that everybody's hand will be up, otherwise we'd have the ambulance outside. And then the next question I ask is, how many of you get enough sleep? And generally about 10% to 15% keep the hands up. So what I would say about sleep is the most important behavioural experience you have in your life. So we don't fully know why we sleep, but we do know it's important. There's the evolutionary factors going back to the caveman and protection in the caves at night when the predators were out. But what we do know is restoration and recovery is a key part of why we sleep. Okay. And, the question is often asked, how many hours sleep do we need? So what they suggest is a range is probably 7 to 9 hours on average. Okay. But when you look at the current data, particularly data from the States, suggestions are that the average person is probably sleeping about 6.5 hours. So anything below 7 is effectively sleep deprived. Right. And that's the average. Okay. So you have some people who are probably above and some people who are way less. So when I'm often talking to people and I say, you probably need the sweet spot of around 8 hours. And they said, oh, yeah, but I hear Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan slept on less than 5 hours. But what was very interesting, both of them suffered from Alzheimer's in later life. And there's been associations with sleep deprivation and Alzheimer's. Okay. So without getting in too much into the science, so one of the things that happens at nighttime is this toxic protein called beta amyloid, which is like a plaque. So when you see people with Alzheimer's, they have this build-up of plaque on the brain. So when you're sleeping, you have this natural irrigation system which removes this beta amyloid. So if you're sleeping poorly, you're accumulating this plaque which has been associated with Alzheimer's. And interestingly, the region of the brain called the hippocampus was where memories are created. We notice in a sleep-deprived individuals, that's the area of the brain that gets damaged first and foremost. And there's an association, for example, between early stage Alzheimer's and short-term memory loss. So there's a lot of interlinkage there. So, if you want to have good memory function, good brain function, there's evidence building to show the importance of good sleep. And interestingly, a lot of the research is not about people who are sleeping well, it's people who are sleeping deprived. Okay. So that's what we're seeing. So there's a lot of things from a physical benefit as well. So from a physical and a cognitive standpoint, sleep is so important. And very interestingly, things like immune function. So they've done studies with night shift workers. And they found that in certain groups, the incidence of various cancers, is way above the norm. For example, they've done work with night shift female nurses and breast cancer. Very interesting. Now, the World Health Organization has now come out with a statement saying that night shift work is a probable carcinogen.
Wow.
So that's
news.
That's quite a statement.
Yeah, it is.
So, and the other thing I say about sleep is free. And how many things are free that we can get real benefit from? Yeah. And it's true, the best things in life are free.
So we should be aiming for 8 hours?
Yeah. So it's 8. So it is plus or minus. So 8 is probably the optimum. But there is some recent evidence suggesting if you sleep too much, it could almost be as bad for you as sleeping too little.
Okay.
So you can oversleep. But very interestingly, if you look at the kind of, as you get older, the suggestion is you sleep less. Clearly, when you're an infant, hopefully a good baby will sleep well, but they need more sleep for their growth, repair, developing the nervous system. And then as you progress onwards, once you get into adulthood, you need probably 7 to 9 hours. Some people say, oh, well, the elderly need less sleep, but that's not strictly true. They probably need approximately the same amount of sleep time, but their sleep is more fragmented. What happens is that they're waking a lot more, primarily due to 2 reasons. One is probably pain, muscle, limb pain, which is causing them to wake, but also probably the need to go to the toilet more at night time. But a really interesting group, and I'm going through this, and I know you're probably going through it as well, is adolescence. So
I was going to ask you about this.
When children go through adolescence, there's obviously the processes of maturation and their hormonal changes that take place. But you have 2 types of what we call chronotype. So you're either a lark, annoying morning person who gets up early, likes to do things early in the morning, and then you have these people who are owls. So in other words, they tend to stay up very late and they work late into the night. Now I'm very much a lark. So approximately 15% of the population, 15-20%, are pure larks or the pure owls, and the rest are intermediate. But what happens during maturation is children, adolescents adopt this more owl chronotype, and their body clock actually shifts by about 2 hours. So at night time, when it's 10 o'clock and you're saying, come on, you need to get to bed, their brain is telling them it's 8 o'clock. In the morning, when it's 7 o'clock and you're saying, come on, it's time to get up, their brain is telling them it's 5 o'clock. And so I'm going to be slightly controversial here. So if we talk about schools and learning, if the object of schools is academic achievement, why are we getting our children to go to school at a time where they prefer to be asleep? And very interesting, and Matthew Walker talks about this. In the States, they've done studies, and in one of the states, they did a project where schools started later. So they started schools at 10 o'clock. In America, schools start earlier than here. So they started the schools at 10 o'clock, and 2 key things happened. What do you think they were?
Student performance? Student
performance dramatically improved, and early morning car fatalities dramatically reduced. So sleep-deprived parents driving kids to school. So the message would be, if schools are purely about academic achievement, and now I know they're about a lot more, our schools should be starting later. Now, of course, parents have to drop to school and there's logistical challenges. But it's just interesting to bear in mind. So it isn't so much that kids are lazy or, they want to stay in bed. It's their chronotype, their body clock has changed. And that will be for about 6 to 8 years.
Yeah. 2 hours is a huge amount of time for that.
Yeah.
To switch over,
Yeah, and I think parents of teens probably get this. You can see it, that the winding down for, you're chasing your teens to say, come on, it's this time and we've school in the morning, and you're trying to get the sleep routine going. And I always feel super guilty pulling them out of the bed in the morning.
Yeah. So there is a little bit of science to say, well, they're not just being lazy.
Yeah, and isn't that really interesting? It does challenge the whole notion of schooling, but then we need to challenge a bit of the schooling thing, how we think about it.
Yeah, and I think another one is, so the questions I'm often asked are around how much sleep do I need? How can I improve my sleep? And I think that's where people come. So I tend to use a simple toolkit.
Okay.
So the things I would emphasize is routine. So going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time. And simple things I would do is I would just have a little alarm on my phone around 10 o'clock, and it just comes up with a message that says time to get ready for the sleep zone. I like to try and be in bed if I can by 10:30, 10:45. So it's routine is a key thing. Having that routine, and I'm going to sound like a bit of a killjoy, and that does mean trying to avoid excessive sleep-ins at weekends.
Okay.
Now, people will do that because they may be trying to bank or recover sleep. So routine would be a critical piece. The next one would be that the bedroom is a sanctuary. So, when I'm talking to adults, I'll be saying the bedroom's for two things: sleep and sex. Okay. And but what we do is we nest. So, we've got the big plasma TV on the wall.
Yeah.
Probably even worse is phones and iPads, because you get this blue light from them. It's emitting. One of the ways that will cause you to sleep, you have this sleep-wake cycle. So, the biological clock. So when it's daylight, your brain is stimulated and you're going to be awake and alert. And at nighttime, you release this hormone called melatonin. Melatonin causes you to sleep. So if you're using an iPad or a phone late into the night, you're emitting blue light, so your brain is being tricked to thinking it's daylight. So you don't release as much melatonin, so your sleep's going to be compromised.
Okay.
So what I'd be saying is that the bedroom is a sanctuary. So again, with going back to kids, if you have the luxury of space in the house, I wouldn't encourage them to do homework in the bedroom. I would encourage the homework to be done in a separate room for that. Yeah. So that's important. So having the bedroom as a sanctuary. The next one is sleep hygiene. So what I mean by that is the bedroom should be cool, should be about 18 degrees. It should be dark, and it should be quiet. Okay. And, again, not having too much heat, too much bedclothes on, this kind of thing would be important. Now, that's an issue in the summer when it's very light. So I always encourage, light blocking curtains would be a key thing in there. So having it as a good environment to sleep. And related to that, people say, well, what do I do if I wake up in the night? Well, the advice I always give is stay in bed for about 20 minutes and try and just relax and see if you can fall back to sleep. If you can't, you're probably better to break the cycle. So rather than think, I can't sleep, get out of the bed, go into a separate room, particularly if you're sharing the room with a partner. Keep it relatively dimly lit and engage in sleep-promoting activities. A paper book, for example, not a Kindle or anything like that. I find when I go to bed, if I read 2 or 3 pages of a book, the eyelids are drooping and I'm gone. Me too. So if you can go into there, it could be things like counting backwards from 1,000. But it's really mundane activities. And then after a while, when you feel a little bit drowsy, go back into the bedroom. So, but the other thing is don't panic, because you are getting some recuperative benefit from rest, from just lying in bed rather than just sleeping. So that's that one. We know that things like exercise and nutrition are important. Regular exercise promotes sleep, but what you should try and do is avoid intensive exercise close to bedtime. Now, this happens because people might be working all day and they may be playing five-a-side soccer, and it happens to be that their session's 10 o'clock. Yeah. That's probably not going to help the sleep. But we do know if you do moderate exercise, it could be a walk with the dog or whatever, that will help promote sleep. So try and avoid intensive exercise close to bedtime. Also with meals, try and avoid large meals before bedtime. And we've been doing some research. I have a PhD who's graduated now, Ronan Doherty, who's done some really nice work, and he just published a systematic review looking at nutrition and sleep in athletes, but it has applications to other populations. So there's different food types that you can use that can promote sleep as well. Okay. Yeah. So there's better natural food sources. But then there's things like caffeine. So, caffeine is a stimulant. So I love my coffee. I love my caffeine. Me too. And what I try and do is minimize caffeine intake after 2 o'clock in the day. So I have all my caffeine hit in the morning and then wind it down, because of that will be a stimulant. So that's one to consider as well. But then things like alcohol and smoking. So, there's this false view that alcohol promotes sleep. What actually happens is you fall asleep very quickly, but your sleep is like the elderly. It's very fragmented. So they've done studies and they've shown this fragmentation. So you're moving around a lot. You're probably dehydrated and you're probably having to get up in the night to go to the toilet.
Yeah.
So alcohol, although it's a sedative, it doesn't promote sleep. And the other one is smoking. Apart from the carcinogenic effects of smoking is a stimulant. So if you're smoking cigarettes in the evening, that's going to stimulate you. And one of the couple of other things I'd say as well. One of the things that I find very beneficial is having a notebook by the bed, paper notebook. And what I would tend to do is encourage people to do a reflection on the day. What went well? Going back to the WWWs, are the things I need to think about for the following day, and then turn the book over. So what you're doing, just starting that offloading process. Yeah. So at night time you're kind of clearing out the short-term memory filing cabinet. So if you do that, it then is probably going to reduce the chance in the night. Oh God, I've got to do that tomorrow. I've got to do this. Yeah. You start that process. So a notebook is useful for that. So they would be the main things. But I think practices of meditation, meditative music, and some people are into it, some are not. But I say try things that are beneficial for you. So I actually like a bit of white noise music to help me sleep. So those kind of things. So I think if you look at those things first and foremost and try and address those to see whether they'll improve sleep. Now, if they're not, it may be an underlying medical condition and you may need to go and see a sleep physician. It could be sleep apnea, for example, or restless feet syndrome, that kind of thing. But I think it's addressing a number of small things, and unfortunately humans like quick fixes, and they aren't always the answer.
Yeah, and I think we know, I'm just going to talk for school leaders at the moment, but there's a lot of stress and burnout in the profession, and there's a lot of attrition in the profession at the moment. And I think a lot of school leaders are struggling with sleep because their heads are racing. Yeah. So I think the idea of the notebook beside the bed is a brilliant idea. I leapt up, I'd just gone to sleep and leapt up wide awake, and I'm looking at my hand where I wrote the thing I need to do today because I didn't have a notebook and I had to not forget it or I couldn't get back to sleep. So that's a brilliant piece of advice.
Something
to give
simple,
people.
and the best ideas are often very simple, but I find it works very, very well. Yeah. And it's just getting into the habit of doing it. So literally for 5 minutes, bullet point what went well during the day, and celebrate successes as well, by the way. Yeah. And then anything I need to do, and it just means that you're freeing a bit of memory space up to start that natural clearing process. Yeah.
And I do think as leaders, we make better decisions and we're more measured when we have rested. Oh, yeah. I mean, the difference in you, when I reflect back on I think the years now, when I look back at how I'm working, I certainly know that when I've had sleep and I've been careful to wind down in the each evening, I'm a much better...
Well, decision making is another key part of it. As leaders, you have to make tough decisions. But if you look at some of the big disasters around the world, a lot of them have been associated with sleep deprivation. So in Chernobyl, the operators, the technical operators, have been on shift for over 13 hours at the time. And it was human error that caused that. There's been cases with plane crashes where they've actually, the black box, they've looked at the voice recordings, and there was a kind of a sounding of a slurred approach. And as you say, if you're a key leader, you had to be on your game and be making the right decisions.
Yeah, I think your focus, even your this is going to sound crazy, but even your measuring of distance when you're driving is deprived. I think when you're tired, like it definitely makes a big difference to all of that.
Absolutely.
But as you say, like the crazy part about it is that sleep is free, as you said, but also the tips that you're giving there are all easily doable.
Do you know what I always say? I'm a scientist. I'm not a rocket scientist, and this is not rocket science. It's very simple stuff, and people think, well, that's pretty obvious, but common sense is uncommon.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with that one, I think, and becoming more uncommon. Can I, so first I'm going to say, listeners, think about your sleep. That's the most important thing, and take a few lessons from this, which I'm doing myself. But something that I'm always impressed with you about, and that you use and that you talk about really highly, is a bullet journal. Would you like to tell people about that? Because I think people could learn something about this.
Yeah, so a bullet journal is a paper journal, and, the trouble I struggle with normal planning journals, they're very structured. The bullet journal, you shape and structure yourself. And it was a colleague, a friend of mine, and a friend of yours, Kieran McDonagh, who put me in touch with it. Colleague, it was his wife, Roisin, who put me onto this. And I have it with me, and I trust by it. So what you do, you create your plans, and it's a structured process whereby you develop it the way you want it, but it allows you to prioritize your program. it allows you to identify the things you have to do and make sure that you're achieving them. So when you achieve them, you mark them off. But what it also tells you, if you're putting the same thing in again and again and again, well, really, is that something that should be in that phase, or should it be moved and migrated to another area? Yeah. So what I like, it's based around some core principles, but you then adapt it to your needs. Whereas I find a lot of journals are very structured. So the pages are all little squares with dots. Yeah. And then you create it yourself. And you can actually go on to Bullet Journal. I think they have on YouTube a couple of clips how to use them. Yeah. And it took me probably about a month to get into it, but I would be lost without it now. Yeah. So I probably get through about at least 1 or 2 journals a year. And I have that. Now, what I've done with mine, I use the back for all my meeting notes. So as well, so I have that within it. But I just find it a fantastic tool. Yeah. So it gives a structure, but it allows me to create the structure myself around my needs. And people use it slightly differently. Yeah, and it allows you, to put the stuff that you need to think about. I see you putting into it, or I see you in meetings. I can see the way that you're sort of now you're organising as you're doing. It's like I think it's become intuitive to you, and I'm quite impressed with that. But it allows you to say, well, hang on a second, I keep writing this item, I'm not addressing it. So maybe it isn't a priority. Maybe that needs to be moved. But the way you break it down by, some people do it by day. I think it's too much. I do it by week. But then you have your month, and then you have monthly actions. Yeah. And then you could have a kind of a year phase as well. So it's everything feeding in from the long term back to the short. Yeah, it's amazing. I think you're very intuitive about these things, and I know I don't know if you know this, but I'm going to say it. But you changed my life in relation to I have an eyesight problem, and that light causes my eyes huge difficulty. And I was struggling. I didn't realize it was blue light, and you introduced me to the Remarkable 2, which has utterly changed my life. I do a lot of my work on it now. And it's a tablet like a Kindle, but it's bigger. But I can read PhDs, I can write to people, I can keep meeting notes. Yeah. And it was because you could see there was a blue light problem, and you just came up with a solution for me. I'm very intuitive about that. That as well, you can get these blue light blocking glasses. Now, I wouldn't use them as a pure compensation to allow me to work into the night with blue screen. Yeah. But what I find is they're very useful if I'm working after 6 o'clock and I'm on a computer. And what it does is just emit some of that blue light. Yeah. And, they can be certainly helpful in terms of eye strain and just trying to reduce the blue light you're getting. So, when you're trying to prepare for that sleep zone, that you're not getting all this stimulus. I mean, these ecological factors, these environmental factors that are around us are affecting our work that we don't realize that they also make you tired. So when you have eye strain all the time, that's making you more tired, and brings headaches, it does everything. And we're spending more and more time on the screen. So, I know we're back more face to face now, but, the idea that, you can do 8 meetings in a day, you can't do that. And you have to have the breaks. One of the best things that happened to me pre-COVID, just before COVID, I got a puppy. And Monty's my best buddy as well, and you know all about him. We talk about Monty, and he's grown with me. But what he does when I'm working at home, every 50 minutes or so, he comes up and gives me a nudge in the leg. And what I do, I get up and I go outside. And so I'm involved in a research called Go Green Roots, where we're looking at the influence of the green environment, but also the blue environment, water, on health and well-being with physical activity. Nice. Some really interesting research has come out to say that if you go outside for even 10 minutes, your heart rate and blood pressure will actually fall. So being in that environment, and it's not to go out and exercise, just to get out. Just go out for 10 minutes, that's it. And sense the environment. So listen to the birds, feel the sound under your feet, really be in the moment. So, taking those recuperative breaks, because people think, well, if I just keep going, I'll be better. But you'll be more productive. Take a 10-minute break, come back to it. Yeah. And just get out don't do the 10-minute break in the kitchen, get out into the back garden or get out. So the dog giving me the nudge gets me to do that. Yeah. But the other thing is, a dog, he's a black Labrador, they need a lot of exercise. So it forces me to walk every day. So again, just being physically active as well. Yeah. It's so important. Yeah, and caring for another soul, is fantastic. I think we look after each other, actually. So. That's really cool. We could all brilliant. Do Monty, I think. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I think Monty likes to chew things. Oh, he does, yeah. So. Unfortunately, that's the downside. So that is the downside. So we like to ask people who join us a few questions just to round up. So I might start by asking you a leader that inspires you and why you've chosen them. Oh, well, I'll probably pick a couple if you don't mind. I mentioned Craig Sharp, my mentor. He was just so influential to me now, sadly passed away now. Again, I mentioned Liam Ogden is somebody who's had a tremendous influence on my career. If I was looking at somebody historically, it would probably be Ernest Shackleton. I'm a big polar exploration and all this, the historical stuff. I have a library at home, but just in terms of his approaches, and it's interesting, a couple of books have come out recently looking at modern business and taking Shackleton's principles to that, and I think they're very compelling. How he led a team, the endurance expedition, how not one of them perished despite the adversity that they faced. And his approaches, I think, are phenomenal.
I think incredible insight about leadership. Really, definitely fantastic. Okay.
So the next one is looking back on your journey. Is there anything that you do differently?
You know what? I don't think I would, because I've been extremely lucky. Now, it probably isn't a good model because it was a very unplanned journey, but luck followed me. But the philosopher,
say people make their own luck.
That's true.
The philosopher Seneca says luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I don't know whether, I wouldn't say I was overly prepared, but I think you do create your own luck. So I certainly, I don't think there's much I would have changed, because I suppose sport has given me the tremendous opportunity to meet some incredible people, but to travel the world. So, and then I was just fortunate to then have an opportunity to come into academia. And I think, I do think at academics, we work incredibly hard. It's a stressful job, but it's an incredibly privileged job. We really are privileged people to do what we do. So, and it's allowed me to continue my passion for working in sport as well, alongside that.
I'm a sucker for a bit of travel. I'm disappointed we didn't hear more about that in the recording. Maybe over a coffee we might.
So, what advice? I mean, we do this anyway in our role as PhD supervisors, and I say champions too, because we champion our people, and I love that about our job. But so, what advice would you give to somebody starting out? Yeah,
so at the beginning, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier. I said, seize the opportunities available to you. And, they are there. And obviously be a little bit selective. So don't try and please everybody. So be authentic to yourself. But I think the most important thing for me is do something you're passionate about.
Yeah.
I mean, my own experience, I was in the bank because it looked like a good career. Well, I absolutely hated it. Absolutely. And it kind of forced me to ask the question, well, what are you passionate about? And I think, unfortunately, sometimes people are very driven by money. Your career is very long, and money is important. You need to survive, etc. But have something you're passionate about, because that really just brings your senses to the fore.
I think that's what keeps you living. I think it's really important.
Passion is important.
So look, Giles, you've been an amazing friend to me, but I also feel, I don't know if you feel this about yourself, you are a natural leader. It's a privilege to be in meetings with you, and it's a privilege to know you and to seek advice from you and to bounce ideas off you. So to be able to bring some of that to the listeners on this podcast, I'm just thrilled we got to do this. I know I've been chasing you for a bit and you're quite busy. So I hope the listeners have really enjoyed it, because I feel it's such a privilege to work with you every day. So I'm delighted that you're here.
It's a privilege to work with you, and it's a pleasure to be with both of you today.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really great fun.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks.